Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for the opportunity to give the committee my perspective on the effects of toxic exposure on our nation's veterans and the Department of Veterans Affairs' often inadequate and frustrating response. Mr. Chairman, this has been a long road, and I ask for the committee's indulgence because I'm not sure that I can give you a very long history in 5 minutes. It may take 6.
Will be easy.
And to my colleague, Senator Blumenthal, I wish I could hold Secretary Mavis in the same regard that you have. But if there's been an epiphany, it's happened lately as it relates to his concern over whether the appropriate documents were available. In many cases, they have made it as difficult as it possibly can be. Before I begin, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recognize Master Sergeant Jerry Insminger, United States Marine Corps retired from White Lake, North Carolina, who's here today and who has been a relentless advocate for Camp Lejeune, for its veterans, for over 15 years. Let me just say, Jerry, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for your fidelity, your courage, and your commitment. Mr. Chairman, during my time on the committee, one toxic exposure issue continued to garner our attention because of its scope, its severity, and the intense public interest, and that's the contamination of the water supply at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. From 1953 to 1987, we know Camp Lejeune residents were exposed to poisoned water from industrial dumping on the base and contamination from a dry cleaner off base. This 34-year event has been called the worst incident of environmental exposure in our nation's history. Hundreds of thousands of service members, their families, civilian workers drank and bathed in water that had been exposed to mixed cancer-causing chemicals that in one case took the life of a 9-year-old girl, Janie Insminger, who was born on base. Once metabolized, the chemical in the water could cause birth defects and increased risk of multiple cancers. The government's scientific investigation into Camp Lejeune began in 1989, but we've only seen significant progress in the last 5 years, spurred by the uncovering of critical Navy and Marine Corps records and the completion of a long overdue studies on the effects of the contamination. Along the way, I went to great lengths to reveal the truth about Camp Lejeune and hold the military and the VA accountable. To this day, I remain appalled at how the United States government has treated these service members and their families. Our government rewarded the sacrifices of these patriotic men and women by negligently poisoning them and their families and by engaging in a decades-long cover-up. It wasn't until 2011, after significant congressional pressure, that the VA began consolidating all disability claims at one VA regional office and coding and tracking them. During the time, I introduced the Janie Insminger Act, named in honor of Master Sergeant Insminger's late daughter. The law was passed and signed into law in 2012. It has provided the much-needed and overdue medical relief to veterans and eligible family members seeking health care for cancers and conditions associated with toxic exposure at Camp Lejeune. Janie's law was based on scientific findings required by congressionally mandated review because within the VA there wasn't the expertise or the resources to explore the science of toxic exposure. The government studies on Camp Lejeune conducted by the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR, are based on test results from water samples taken at Camp Lejeune over successive years. The studies show some of the highest levels of recorded toxins in any U.S. water system, and it reached the taps in houses, in barracks, and offices. ATSDR has found that Camp Lejeune residents experienced higher rates of mortality at a younger age than those from an unaffected Marine Corps base. Higher incidence of birth defects in children born on the base and a statistically high number of male breast cancer survivors. In fact, several chemicals found at Camp Lejeune water are now classified as known human carcinogens by the EPA and the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Mr. Chairman, the resistance inside the VA to the scientific data And the fact that Camp Lejeune demonstrates how VA has dealt with the scientific facts of toxic exposure overall. In the case of Lejeune, their approach ranged from scare tactics, like issuing overinflated estimates on long-term cost of care to this committee and benefits, and suggesting the Department of Defense should take care of Camp Lejeune families instead of VA. They produce passive-aggressive rebuttals of the scientific findings, have sought additional scientific studies, and created a bizarre procedural hurdle for Camp Lejeune veterans to overcome in the disability claims process. To this day, Lejeune veterans from across the country contact my office and relate demoralizing accounts of ignorant VA doctors in a claims process that is frequently deaf and blind to scientific evidence and medical opinion. This summer, Secretary McDonnell indicated he wants his people to back away from this adversarial approach, work with veterans with a history of toxic exposure, and begin by engaging Congress and government scientists to develop sound policies for Camp Lejeune veterans. In July, Senator Tillis and I sat down with the chairman and Secretary McDonnell to raise some questions that were very serious about a VA team of clinicians reviewing Lejeune veterans' disability claims before final decisions were made on service connection. These VA doctors were in various cases cherry-picking the science, misrepresenting or misinterpreting scientific studies, using questionable sources, and overruling the opinions of veteran oncologists. In the glaring case of one Marine, Norman Michelny, suffering from kidney cancer, a VA clinician stated that there was no evidence one of the chemicals at Camp Lejeune water, the carcinogen TCE, was known to cause kidney cancer. VBA later denied the claim. When VA was later shown evidence that the exposure to TCE is widely accepted as a cause of kidney cancer, VA removed the citation in the denial notice, then reissued it and denied the claim again. Mr. Chairman, this is unbelievable, but sadly true. There are many other Camp Lejeune veterans with similar stories. Mr. Chairman, at our July meeting, Secretary McDonnell, to his credit, openly and fully recognized the fact that the science on Camp Lejeune was undeniable, and he agreed to work with ATSDR to compile data for a presumptive disability policy soon afterwards. And soon afterwards, VA publicly announced support for 3 cancers that would be covered. Last week, ATSDR submitted its 70-page report to VA detailing at least 6 cancers where sufficient evidence of causation from toxic exposure at Lejeune exists, and several more conditions where moderate evidence of causation exists. Secretary McDonnell has taken the first step to acknowledge ATSDR and other key agencies must play an integral role in helping VA confirm and understand toxic exposure. But I'm not convinced the olive branch from the Secretary will result in good policy beyond Lejeune if VA ultimately decides polishing its image more than the scientific merit. When it comes to confirmed toxic exposure like those at Camp Lejeune, make certain the VA heeds the best science. Will be required strong and engaged leadership from Secretary McDonnell and, Mr. Chairman, rigorous oversight from this committee. Congress must ensure VA health and benefits policy is based on fact, not conjecture or emotion, so those veterans who have been harmed by toxic exposures are properly cared for and compensation for their suffering. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for this opportunity. I thank for the indulgence of the committee, and I trust the committee will continue its very important responsibility.
Well, thank you, Senator Burr, and thank you for your focus on Camp Lejeune, and we continue to work with you, and we'll work till we get a solution on all those problems. Thank you for your testimony.